But Stephanie, I'm on the birth certificate. Welcome to the Stephanie Young Law Podcast, hosted by me, Stephanie Young. I'm a family law litigation attorney in Covington, Georgia, with a passion for being my client's biggest legal ally. Today's episode is relevant if you have a child born out of wedlock. That's like wedlock, right? That's a old name. What does that mean? It means that you're never married. You weren't married to the other parent when the child was born, and you didn't marry them after. So if you have a child that is a result of a relationship in which you were never married to the parent, then this episode is for you. Paternity versus legitimation. Okay, that's what we're going to discuss on today's episode. So paternity, and I know what I said in the initial part of the episode was, so I'm on the birth certificate? Okay, let's dissect what that means. Paternity. Paternity means that the father is the biological father. It means that the DNA, whether there's been a DNA test or there's been no objection, there's no question about the paternity. So it doesn't necessarily mean there's been a DNA test. It just means that both parents are confident to say that we know that we are both, that the father is biologically the father of this child. Then at that point, we can say, okay, paternity has been established. Just being on the birth certificate. Okay, so that's a big thing, both on the fact of, okay, I made it on the birth certificate of the child. If you're the dad, cool, that means I've got these rights. No, it does not. But on the other side of that is, oh my goodness, I'm not on the birth certificate. So let me get on the birth certificate, or I can't, they'll never have my last name, or, if you're the father, or, that can't change, or, oh my goodness, now I'm not gonna have a relationship with the child. That's not true either. Okay. So I'm kind of here to talk about some of those myths and debunk them. Okay. So paternity means that there's a biological connection. It does not mean that there's any legal relationship with that child. So what does the legal father mean? A legal father is a father that is able to go to court and fight for visitation and custody. Or there's already an order establishing to say that, this is the visitation that you have. But it gives you the right to go to court to argue for those things if you are the legal father. It also means that whether you go to court or not, if you were to pass away as the legal father, then that means that your child can inherit from you, which is important. That your child's not going to have to go and try to prove anything like after you pass away to try to get part of your estate. It's basically, I'm the legal father, this is my child, and there's no questions asked in terms of that lineage. But the biggest aspect that I see is that you've got parents that are in situations in which everything is good, everybody's happy. So, they don't really think about it, right? Like, we're in a relationship, we're not married, we're not going to get married, but we're good, we're happy. Until you're not, right? Nobody plans for separation, right? And what that leads to is fathers who have always been maybe in this child's life. And all of a sudden, the mom just cuts off contact. I've seen that a lot, and it's a very sad situation, but I have hope. That can be resolved through what's called a legitimation petition. So that is saying that when you file that, you're saying, that I not only am the biological father, and maybe you're on the birth certificate, maybe you're not. Doesn't matter if you're not. We can absolutely still file that. And I want to have a legal relationship with the child, meaning legal rights to this child, and I want custody and visitation. And so that gives you the power to be able to do that. But without going through the courts, you do not have that. So if you think, I'm on the birth certificate, so that means that if we separate, I'm going to be fine, that, I can I can show that birth certificate to law enforcement when I go pick up my kid, and they're going to say, yeah, you're the dad, you're good. No, that's not accurate at all. They're going to say, well, do you have any order from a court to say that this child, you have custody of this child, or visitation rights, or, are you even legitimated? And you're going to say legitimated. What does that mean? And then you're going to realize very quickly when it's too late, right? Or not too late, but when you're in a situation in which you're really wanting to maintain that relationship with your child, and you're having to pause and then say, okay, well, I guess I need to file a whole legitimation action just to be able to see my child that I have spent, every day with since they were born. Georgia, this is a very state-specific issue. The reason I say that is because there's other states where that's not quite the same. I am licensed here in Georgia, State Bar of Georgia. So that means that everything that I'm talking about on this episode and in any of my episodes is specifically related to Georgia law. So that means also keep in mind that if you move states and you don't have an order already, so that means that let's say that you were in another state in which if you're on the birth certificate, maybe in those states it's different. And in that specific state, it does give you some rights, some legal rights to the child. Again, in Georgia, it does not. But let's say it does in that state. That's great for that state, but what if you guys move? And then you separate. You move to Georgia and you separate. Guess what? It's not going to say, well, where was the child born? No. It's going to go back to, where are you right now? Where does this child live right now? Where does the mother reside? And it's going to be here in Georgia. Then that's going to pose a problem for you. So I want you to keep that in mind. Now, another thing to keep in mind, if you are in Georgia and you legitimate and go and we get custody and visitation established through a court order, and then you move, okay, that's okay. At that point, because it is a court order and it's within the United States, you can file in the new state what's called a domestication. So you file to domesticate that foreign order. And if you want to hear another video, another episode on that specific topic about domesticating orders, whether that's our order somewhere else, or you have an out-of-state order that you want to enforce in Georgia, doesn't mean you have to start the whole process over and redo it. It just means that we need to domesticate that order. And I would love to talk about that in another video if you guys are interested. Just let me know. Contact me, message, comment down below. So let's go back to that initial question. You're on the birth certificate. The child has your dad's last name, okay? What does that mean? Well, the only thing that really means for you, this is just, again, I said in an earlier episode that I don't get paid to tell people what they want to hear. I get paid to tell people the truth of what my legal opinion is. And sometimes they correspond, everything aligns, and sometimes that's not the case. This is probably one of those. It just means that you're on the hook for child support, okay? Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? And if you're a mother watching, it's definitely a necessary aspect because guess what? Kids have to eat, okay? But it does still mean, okay, that means that the mom could completely withhold and say, you don't have any rights. This is my child. I'm saying you're not even going to see them, but you will pay. Okay. That helps the mom in the sense of if you're, that paternity, has an extent is easy to establish through a DNA test. And I know that Child Support Services also handles those, on your behalf, and to be able to just confirm, okay, if dad demands a DNA test because one hasn't been done, they'll go ahead and get that done. And then bam, child support can be established. But what if you get served with that child support petition, the paternity petition to try to establish child support, and you're like, okay, so surely this means that I'm going to have visitation or custody or some rights to this. If I'm paying, then shouldn't I also be able to see my child? Well, the answer to that is that's not the default position. The default position is just because you pay, that has nothing to do with seeing your child. That's a totally separate issue. So that's when you come to me, you consult with me, and that's when we go ahead and file a legitimation action that is very frequently filed at the same time as a paternity action is pending. Okay. And we go ahead and say, yeah, we understand we're going to establish child support, but we're also going to establish and ask to be legitimated, custody, and visitation to be established. All three of those things. And that would be all within one filing. So it's not like, you have to file all these different cases. You can do it cohesively because, of course, they're all related. So the mom. A mom cannot file a legitimation action. This is something that even some attorneys get wrong, okay? A mom cannot file legitimation action. Only a father can file legitimation action. Now, if I'm a mom and I'm like, okay, I need child support and I would love for him, for my child, I would love for the dad to be involved. I would love for that visitation to get started. You can't make it, right? So what do you do? And I've handled several of these. Well, okay, then let's go ahead and file a paternity action, which demands the child support. And typically that results in what I just said, where the dad will counterclaim and start a legitimation and custody and visitation all in the same case. So the mom can't start a legitimation per se, but the mom can start a paternity action that is going to probably trigger the dad to file legitimation, okay? As far as the father is the one that files the legitimation. Keeping in mind, like I just said a few moments ago, this also means that child support's coming too. You're not going to get legitimation established and custody visitation and not have child support also established. So just keep those in mind when you're coming to me, that, to expect those things. But typically, and again, you don't have to be served with child support papers to say, for paternity, to say, oh, I want to legitimate. That's you're already a little bit behind. You should be asking for legitimation. Really, my advice would be to say as soon as possible. We can actually file legitimation actions before the child is born. You can file it, okay? And that's also something that some attorneys do not get right. You do not have to wait to file it until the child's born. You just have to wait to finalize it until the child is born, okay? So that means that we can start a case, and I have done that several times. We can go ahead and start a case. We just can't finalize it until the child is born for obvious reasons. We need a name, we need a date of birth, gender, all those sorts of things. And at that point, the DNA test, if the mom or the dad ask for that. It's not a requirement unless, either party asks for it. And so, you can absolutely get a head start on it. And I always recommend that. But let's say you have a young child, the sooner the better to legitimate, because that's showing the court that I am taking a step forward to say that I want to build this legal relationship with this child. Because there has been instances, and this is definitely a rare instance in which, let's say you guys have been in a relationship and the child's now 14, the child's entire life, okay? The child's 14 and the dad comes and says, well, they separate, the mom and the dad, and then the dad's like, okay, now I want to legitimate. I have seen courts, and again, it's not a frequent aspect, but I have seen courts deny legitimation for the fact that the dad has lost his opportunity interest. So it means basically, Dad, you waited too long. This child's 14. What are you doing now? Coming and saying that you want to be in that child's life. And I can see the two sides of that. Of it kind of prevents saying, it motivates people if they know that information, right? And that's kind of why I'm here, to make sure that you're informed. My goal has always been to empower my listeners. Because maybe you didn't even know, right? You don't know what legitimation is. But the courts, a lack of knowledge on the law, lack of awareness of the law is not an excuse to the law. It's not an excuse to not follow, or not an excuse to kind of later argue. And so I just want to make sure that that's something that I'm passionate that parents are made aware of that. So I also have situations where, I'm asked, but Stephanie, what if both of us, both parents, we are living happily in a relationship. We're not married. That's fine. We're happy. Why would I file a court case against somebody that I'm happily living with in a relationship? And I get it, right? Because this isn't a divorce, okay? It's not a divorce. And I understand it's like, okay, but that's litigation. Guess what? The dad still needs to legitimate. So if I have a son, if If there was a situation in which there was a child born, my grandchild was born out of wedlock, I would say, okay, we've got to legitimate. It's awesome y'all are happy. I love that. And this is not to start things, but it is to say, these are the rights. And if the mom is informed, it can be much less conflict and just more accepted and just an understanding of, and hey, if you are the mom, it's just an understanding it's a good thing for that child when they're young. And if you're in a relationship, it means, you feel like that's a good parental figure, a good father for that child, then absolutely it's a good thing for you too, because it's the dad taking that next step to say, I want to, memorialize in an order that I'm the legal father and I will be taking care of this child for the rest of from the rest of the parent's life, And so I have I've handled several uncontested legitimations. So that's when it's a totally different aspect. We're not going in and saying, if y'all are together, we're not going in and saying, oh, mom, we're going to get you served by a sheriff, because even though y'all are happily living in the same house, there's no restrictions on visitation. You guys have a joint bank account maybe, and you're, in that situation. We're not saying all of a sudden the child support has to start and I'm going to start taking it from your check. No, we just say now it's even better to talk about these things when everybody's happy. Okay? Because that's when emotions aren't going to be, anger isn't going to take over. We're just going to sit down like adults that want the best for this child and say, we're together. So, the custody is basically joint legal custody. And if, I know that that's a very, very tailorized but popular legal term that if you want to hear in another episode, kind of talk about more of what that means, comment down below and we can get that addressed. I would love to do an episode on that for you guys. But we can put that in the order, and then we can also go ahead in the proposed order and we can just kind of talk about, well, this is what the child support number would be if we were not living in the same house. So it doesn't mean that, I've done that several times. It doesn't mean that the child support is going to start right away. It just means that, okay, if we were to separate, this would be the number monthly. And if we were to separate, this is some visitation, what that would look like. But the main thing is that we do a final order on legitimation. So that means final, that's not getting modified. That is a final order. Now, visitation, custody, those things can be modified. But the legitimation to say, I am the legal father, that is not something that you've got that for life, for the child's life. And we can go ahead and lock that in and do it in a very non-adversarial way. So it's not trying to say, oh, you're going to leave me, or, no. Again, that goes back to making sure that both the mother and the father are informed, that it's not becoming adversarial. It's just protecting both the father's rights, but also as the mom, because that also means on the flip side that mom, if you guys aren't to work out, you don't have to go hunt dad down. We already have a child support order in place. And so it definitely is a mutual beneficial thing to do. And it's also frequently because, in those situations, you're not litigating it, which means you're not, because you agree in that situation, you're not having to go to court several times. You're probably not exchanging on discovery, that they're cheaper. It's a much less attorney's fees to do something like an uncontested legitimation than it is to do a contested legitimation, which is what happens when you are separated. Now, I will be honest and transparent that most of my cases are the contested legitimations, right? That everything's good until it's not. And that's fine. That is what I see 90%, 95% of the time if we're looking at legitimations, and 5% of the time it would be an uncontested legitimation. But maybe with this information, I'm hoping to kind of change that and get some of these uncontested legitimations going, as opposed to waiting for it to be contested. Again, I just briefly talked about it a moment ago, that there's a final legitimation order. What does that mean? It's a little bit different than a final order on custody and visitation, in the sense of you can come back and let's say it's the best interest of the child standard. And we'll talk about that in a lot of episodes as the weeks go by, the best interest of the child. It's a very important phrase there that the courts use here in Georgia. But we definitely can modify custody visitation as the needs of the child changes, right? Because the whole point is what the child needs at 12 months old is probably not going to be what the child needs at 14 years old. So that's definitely, we can modify that. But a legitimation to say you are the legal father, you don't go back on that, right? That wouldn't make any sense. So we do, within the case, we're going to enter a final order on legitimation, even at a temporary hearing. I know that sounds wild, but at a temporary hearing, we're still going to finalize that because once you put it, you're not changing that. That's not getting modified. And then we'll do a temporary order on the visitation and custody just to kind of see how things are going before we finalize it. But even on a final basis on custody and visitation, those things can be modified. Those things can be changed as the needs of the child changes. Now, last name. I know that that's a big thing, for fathers, but also for mothers to say, what's my, because it feels like I'm a mother too. I have 3 kids, and I know it feels like, okay, the last name is their identity. And you're not wrong. As a parent, I understand that. But putting my lawyer hat on, what I'm going to tell you is that it does, and this is where it's really important that your legal counsel, your legal ally, is experienced in front of the judges that you're in front of, that your case specifically is going to be in front of. Because it's a topic that really is judge dependent on, okay, if we have a contested legitimation, and when the child was born, the child, because the mom is control at the hospital. If you don't have legitimation already, if you're not married, the mom is going to be in charge of what goes on that birth certificate. The hospitals are trained in that. So that means that the mom could very well put her last name and not the dad's last name on the birth certificate. The hospital is not the place, it is not a courtroom. It is not the place to kind of argue about that at all. Okay, but if that's the case and that happens, does not mean that moms need to hear this, but dads need to hear this. That does not mean that can't change later. So that does mean that, when we file the legitimation, we're also going to ask that the child's name match dad's last name if I represent the dad. And I've been on the other side of that where that was served on mom and mom's like, I don't want that. I want them to have my last name, which is what they already have. They've had that since birth. That's where that argument comes in, and that's where you get your good litigation attorney, because kind of finding out what's mom's purpose behind why does she want to keep her name, the child's name is what it's been since birth. There's going to be a much different argument for a 1-year-old that hasn't started school yet, started writing their name, said their name, versus an 8-year-old, okay, that they've really identified with that last name. They've been in school, maybe they're in 2nd grade, 3rd grade. There's going to be a difference there that the judge sees, and maybe not. It just depends on what judge. But in my experience of the judges in my circuit, that's a big difference on whether or not we're going to change the name or even hyphenate the last name. And maybe neither party wants that, because maybe you both have long names, and that's to have an extra long name with a hyphen. Maybe both parents are like, I don't want that. So keep that in mind too. That's another option that the judges have. But it is something that can be litigated. And again, that's kind of why you want to make sure that you're speaking to counsel that has the ability to know finesse those arguments in knowing what your goals are as the client. If you have a child that was born out of wedlock, so it means that you were never married to the parent, even if you're in a current relationship with that parent without a court order, so that means you hadn't legitimated yet, you are at risk of disrupting your peace. Contact my office and we can set up a consultation to discuss a particular plan for your circumstance. Because remember, peace is priceless and attainable. We've got this. If you find this content relevant and you want to hear more, I ask that you subscribe, share, and interact by liking and commenting below. Hey guys, I just wanted to jump on and give a disclosure that watching my videos does not create an attorney-client relationship. Also, the information that's contained within the videos is for educational purposes only. Thank you so much for watching.